Good morning, good evening, everyone, because of the part of the world you are joining. Welcome to VizConnect. My name is Sagar Kapoor, and I'm part of customer success team at Tableau. So, VizConnect is all about connecting you with the art of data visualization and storytelling. So, VizConnect started as a small project with one of the Tableau ambassadors in India, Divya Bharti, in which we wanted to create a platform in which we can inspire people to go ahead and share best practices, connect everyone with the Tableau ambassador community champions. So far, we have hosted close to 37 sessions. We had 42 speakers, 6,000 attendees so far. And by the way, it's a typo error over here. It's 1,000 subscribers on YouTube channel. So we are celebrating that. And we have a LinkedIn group in which you can go ahead, connect to people, and share the best practices. And this all has been possible with the help of our awesome community. So thank you to everyone. So go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Some amazing content waiting for you. Join the LinkedIn group, connect with everyone, share your best practices. And let's go ahead and let me talk about today's speaker. So today we will talk about learning to love the layout pane in Tableau. So we have Katie Wagner and Cesar with us. So Katie is a proud Cajun and a data enthusiast. Outside of her work on the people team at CBRE, she dreams of fun, everyday occurrences that should be beautiful visualization. Katie's passion is helping others excel in their goals, and when not limited by global pandemics, she loves traveling to visit her Tableau community friends. So welcome, Katie. Caesar has over 13 years of experience in the BI world, which is quite an adventure. Data roles that normally seem mundane have taken Caesar from reports for sales and marketing teams to developing charts for congratulation reports and federal policy. The largest cloud computing companies in the world, some really huge data sets, and even a visit to the Olympic Training Center. So without further ado, let me hand it to Katie. Katie, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to pass the ball over for me. Thank you. Alrighty. So again, thanks for having us here. Cesar and I have been looking forward to this for a long time, and we're excited to be here. As you mentioned, I absolutely love interacting with the Tableau community, and I'm proud to be a social media ambassador for Tableau. But one of the things that you may not know about my experience in Tableau is that I have no formal design background. I haven't taken any graphic design classes. Basically, everything that I've picked up that helps me work on dashboards has been through this and other design communities. And so, one of the things that's so important to me is as I continue to learn about Tableau, this is an area I want to expand upon. And I think it's because one of my pastimes, one of my hobbies, is cross stitching. And I love it because there's a pattern. And I know that if I follow that pattern and I put the correct colors in the correct spaces, that I'm going to end up with something beautiful. It's aligned and it works. It produces the picture that I'm looking to see. So I make the joke that I'm an accidental or aspiring designer. And I use that word very carefully. If you think about YouTube home cooks or folks that are, gathering a following for cuisine that they make, I feel like that's a separate bucket from calling someone a chef. The word chef to me comes with formal training and many years of experience, the way that I sort of aspire to the word designer. But Cesar, I know that your story is a little bit different. So let's hear from you about how we got here.
Yeah, Katie, it's interesting. I learned a little about design at the university and college, and I was always interested in design. And something I found out was that I had just this natural eye for placement and layout, but I went by feel. And it's interesting because it's like through my journey, And as I came to data visualization, it helped me out, but there was a lot that I did by feel. And I remember learning a lot about things foundationally in classes in school, but it never quite clicked until I had to explain design to other people. And also at certain points, I started working at a level where design was even so much more important and things had to be really crisp and perfect. And that's where I discovered, unlike Katie, I was a designer, but I didn't have a pixel problem. I just kind of went off feel. And I found I had to figure out how to quantify this and make things pixel perfect for myself. And I went back to what I'd learned in school. And that helped me explain once again to others how to build really beautiful dashboards.
Yeah. That's perfect. And I think that there are a lot of different routes that we could take to assist all of you with what we know on Tableau dashboards. But today we're going to focus a little bit on the foundational components, so the dashboard pane itself. And then we're going to spend a lot of time on the layout pane. How do we take those dashboards to the next level? When you look at something and you say, wow, this looks really nice, how did we get there? What are some of the elements that you can add to get that feeling in your dashboard? So we talk a bit about layout. And for me, what that starts with is the arrangement of the items on the screen. If we take a look, we'll be spending all of our time during this session on these two panes, specifically looking at how we bring items together on a dashboard. And what we can see in this dashboard, because Tableau is really easy to work with, when I'm using a tiled, or I like to think of it as an aligned layout, I can drag items onto the screen and they'll snap into place. So for example, if I were to pick up the age sheet from the left-hand pane and drag it into my dashboard, Tableau is going to want to find a spot for it. The problem that we run into is when I pick up age, I want it to share the space on this row that I've highlighted. Basically, I would like for division, account, and age all to take up equal spacing within the dashboard. So we're going to try it. I'm going to pick up age. But what you notice when I bring it into the dashboard is that I can place it to the left or right of division, to the left or right of account, but I can't really place it exactly in the center of only that row. I run into some issues there. And so one of the components that I've found is really helpful for this idea of alignment and being able to adjust components in the dashboard, or these layout containers. So even though they live on the dashboard pane, in the bottom left corner of your dashboard pane, you have both horizontal and vertical layout containers. A layout container is basically a placeholder or a box that helps you arrange the items within it. So for example, in our horizontal layout container, we're going to be able to place items left to right inside of that container. So what we can see here is that we can place our highlight table to the left of our bar chart. What I think is so special about this horizontal container is that we can control, remember pixel perfect that Cesar and I are looking for, we can control the width of the objects inside of that horizontal container. And then similarly for our vertical layout containers, as you might imagine, we're going to stack those items top to bottom. We can control the height of an object that's inside of this container. So if I want this stacked bar to be exactly 100 pixels tall, I can place it in a vertical container and I can control that height. So let's take a look at it here. We're seeing that we have our three worksheets side by side, but we want to be able to control how wide each of them are so that they share the space evenly. My first step is going to be to bring in our horizontal layout container from the bottom left corner of our dashboard pane. And at this point, it doesn't really matter where I put that container. I'm going to place it somewhere above or below this under construction text box. One of the first components, one of the first helpful tips that I received about working with these containers is to ensure that they have enough space, that they're either tall or wide. What you might notice is if that your container is too small, when you try to drag an object inside of that container, and the way that we're going to be doing this is by clicking on a dashboard object, looking for its gray tab at the top, and then moving it around. If the container is too small, I can place my object to the left of the container or to the right of the container. But what I want to do is place it within. So first tip that we can provide is make sure that you have enough space. You can always realign your objects later. Secondly, you want to ensure that you're placing gray objects, so worksheets, text boxes, web pages, all of your dashboard objects minus containers will have a gray border. And you want to put those gray objects inside of your blue bordered containers. So gray objects go inside of blue containers. I'm going to pick up my account sheet, and I could drag it directly into the container. But a third tip that I've received is to ensure that you have a placeholder. I like to pick up a blank, but you could use a text box or an image. You want some sort of placeholder to ensure that Tableau keeps the space. You want to ensure that you can come back and find that container when you need it. And I'll show you what happens later if we don't put this blank in. So I'm adding a blank to my horizontal layout container. You can see that blue border all the way around the container. It looks like it takes up the entire space. However, if you want to know which container an object is inside of, you can simply just double click on its gray tab at the top. So if I double click on the gray tab for my blank object, you can see that it's actually inside of that blue container. Now that we've got our blank placeholder, I'll pick up a count and I'll drag it to the left or to the right of my container. Remember, we're stacking them side by side horizontally. I'll pick up division, and notice that I can put division all the way to the left, or I can put it in between the blank and the account sheet. Same with age. I can pick up age and I can place it inside of that horizontal container. So this looks all right, but it doesn't give us exactly what we needed. Remember, we want to make sure that things are pixel perfect. One of the components that Tableau provided for us inside of version 10.3, so a little while ago in Tableau development, Tableau gave us the opportunity to distribute evenly. And for me, this was huge because remember, if you're trying to be pixel perfect, there might be a lot of math involved. Okay, think about this. I know the width of my dashboard is 1100 pixels. So if I divide that by 3, then maybe I'm somewhere around 366. I don't want to do all of that. I want it to be easier, and it is. If I double click on an object to select the container that it's inside of, I can use the drop down arrow in the upper right corner and use Tableau's ability to distribute the contents evenly. Total game changer for me when this was released. Now you notice that because the blank placeholder is still inside of the container, it is taking up 1/4 of that space. but that's an easy fix. I don't need it anymore. I can click on my blank object, and in the upper right corner, I can choose the X to close it, and everything adjusts to fit those equal thirds. So inside of this container, we were able to distribute those items evenly. One of the first instances where I used layout containers was to control the dashboard title of our view. So I want you to imagine that we have a logo or some image, and then we have the dashboard title next to that image. Well, again, stacking those items left and right would require that horizontal container. I'm going to pick up a horizontal layout container and drag it to the very top of our dashboard. I'm going to make sure not to forget my blank placeholder, which I'll add into the container. I want my image to be all the way to the left, so I'll pick up my image object and drag it to the left of the container, making sure that I see that blue outline. We'll go and choose our image or our logo. And I know for this one that we want to both fit and center this image to make it fit correctly. And I'll take a second just to point out an opportunity for accessibility on your dashboards. You may want to add in some sort of alternative text for screen readers and those that are helping those that might have visual disabilities that are consuming the data that's on your dashboard. So you might put a note here about what we're seeing. We'll call it company logo. Additionally, if I want to add the title into my container, I could add a text box. In my case, I've chosen to create the title as a worksheet because, as you can see, it has what could be a dynamic date within it. So I'll pick up my worksheet, drag it to the right of my icon inside of the container. Remember, the value of this horizontal container is that I can either distribute the contents evenly, or in this scenario, I know that I want this item to be about 80 pixels wide. So if you right click on an object, or if you choose the drop down arrow in the upper right corner, this is where you have the ability, because it's in a container, to edit the width. I'm going to edit the width of my logo. I'm going to make it about 80 pixels wide. We'll remove the worksheet title from our dashboard title sheet. And then, of course, I don't need this blank anymore. It was just there as a placeholder while I was building. So I can remove that blank, and we'll see that the rest of the title fills in appropriately. So it's great that we can stack those items side by side in a horizontal container. There also may be instances where we want to place objects in a vertical container. So for instance, from a formatting perspective, if I wanted to put some sort of separator between my title and the rest of my dashboard, I could do this with a colored blank object or an image if I wanted to. But to be able to control exactly how tall that object is, they would need to be inside of a vertical layout container. So we're going to pick up the speed just slightly. We're going to do a little bit of movie magic here. We'll bring in our vertical container to the left of the entire dashboard. We're going to drag over each of our components. Quick note, make sure you're dragging over the entire horizontal container and not just the sheet itself. We're dragging our dashboard title into the vertical container, followed by our under construction text box, followed by our 3 top charts, division, account, and age in their container. And wait. Okay, we forgot our blank. When we started this vertical container, we didn't add the blank as that extra placeholder. So the reason that that's helpful for us is because at this point, when I try to pick up team lead, job title, and years of service, I sort of have a difficult time placing it at the bottom of my vertical container. The way that it highlights that gray square would be underneath. If I put it between division and account where the line is now, that wouldn't stack it underneath those charts. It would stack it side by side in their horizontal container. So we could have worked around this if we had remembered to add that blank object, but it's okay. I can simply pick up my last 3 charts. I'll temporarily place them on top of division, account, and age. And then very easily, I can pick up the bottom 3 charts, division, account, and age, and move them in that vertical container. You're looking for that horizontal dashed line. We're going to move them on top of team lead, job title, and years of service. So just a little demo there of what happens if we forget to add the blank into our container as a placeholder. Last but not least, our entire goal was to add in that formatting line. I like to use a blank object because we get to control some of its properties. So I'll pick up my blank object from the bottom left corner of the dashboard. I'll add it right below my dashboard title. And this is where we start to look at our layout pane. There's a whole set of opportunities that we have in this layout pane that we may not have seen before. One of those components is that we get to control the background color, or in this case, the fill of a blank object. So on my layout pane, I'm going to change the background color to blue. And remember, we put this item inside of a vertical container so that we could control its height. So I'll click the drop-down arrow on my blank object, edit its height, and we'll go about 11 pixels. Now, you might be looking at that and thinking, oh, I don't know if that looks to be exactly 11 pixels. And Cesar's laughing because he knows why. And Cesar will chat a lot more about why this is a little bit later. But this looks okay for now. 11 pixels seems to work. So we'll use it moving forward. There are many different things that we can leverage with the layout of these containers. So for example, I have 6 of my charts inside of an overall layout container. They're each in their own horizontal layout container, but they're both in a vertical container. And the reason that I've done this, somewhat for alignment, but also because when we have that container selected, we have the ability to control its border. So I'm going to double click on each of my containers so that I'm selecting the larger one. And I want you to notice that inside of our layout pane, we've chosen just a very light gray dashed border. And what that does is it calls your attention visually to these items being grouped together. So that's one of the additional benefits, is that we can leverage the outlines of these containers to call attention to the spot on the dashboard that we want each user to see. We could do the same thing by adding a border to each one of our horizontal containers. But what I didn't love about this is you can see that they sort of overlap in the center. And there are workarounds for this. But instead, I wanted to try a different approach. Instead of using just the borders from the container, what if I made my own borders? The layout that you're seeing here, instead of using the borders on the container, I've added in images of those gray dashed lines. So maybe as an idea, you might have some sort of icon or logo that you want to make really, really tiny and have it repeat over and over again as a separator. Of course, you would want to be cautious about making it a bit too obvious, but that could be an extra touch, a special style for your branding. I've created this dashed line in a tool like PowerPoint or others. And the reason this works is because I get to control the width. Otherwise, it might be too large. It might take up too much of the space. Same with our separator in the center. Because I get to control the height of that image or object, I can add in my own custom borders to make this match exactly what I'm looking for. And that gives me some of the separation that we're seeing here. And I like that style. I like the idea of having those lines a little bit separated. So last but not least, with formatting these different containers, if I wanted to forego the lines completely and just call some visual attention, maybe I could leverage the fact that worksheets are inside of containers. I want you to notice that there's a little bit of space in between your worksheet and the container that it lives inside of. Cesar's going to tell us more about how we can control how much space is there, but imagine that we could fill in the space between the sheet and the container with some sort of color. So if we take a look here, I'm going to double click to select my horizontal container and double click again to select the entire container. And watch what happens when I change the container's background in the layout pane to this light gray. What you've seen for division and account is I've already selected those dashboard objects and I've changed the worksheet's background to white, which is what it was originally. And because those white worksheets are inside of a gray container, it sort of visually brings them to the front. If I were to change the background for each one of these worksheets, and I'm doing this all from the layout pane, we get this nice automatic outline around all of our components. This little pesky crosshatched or shaded area, I've had a lot of questions about that one. Katie, what is going on? Why is there some space left? Well, remember, when we were using the images, there was some width being taken up in the container by those two horizontal images. And when I removed them, Tableau said, okay, well, here's your placeholder. Are you going to put those images back in? We say, no, thanks, Tableau. I'm not interested. So why is this happening? If we look at age, we can see that it's pinned. The width of the age worksheet has already been set. So it's not feeling pressured to expand to fit the remainder of the container. And the same is true with account and division. They are each fixed in their width. So a quick way to work around this, of course, we could just unpin the width of our age worksheet. But I'm a little concerned that now age is wider than the others. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on my age sheet, select my entire container, and then just distribute those contents evenly again. So if you see those those diagonal lines show up in your container, look for the push pin icons and see if there is a width or a height that you can unpin so that it fills the remainder of the container. Last but not least, we've spent a lot of time talking about containers in a tiled layout. And that is typically my preference. But Tableau also gives us the opportunities to use these containers in a floating layout. And if you aren't familiar with floating, it gives you a bit more opportunities of exactly where an object falls on the dashboard. It's been described to me as a sticker before. I can pick it up and I can stick a floating object anywhere that I want on the dashboard. Here's why this is valuable with containers. Imagine that I decide to add in a filter for my termination reasons. I'm going to choose to add in my termination reason filter. And typically what would happen, whoops, let me close this one out. Typically what would happen is this container would show up all the way to the left-hand side of our dashboard. It would take up that the right-hand side. It would take up that entire right-hand side of our dashboard. But that makes our formatting look a little strange. So in Tableau version 19.2, we received the opportunity to make these containers expand and collapse. But to be able to do this, we need to make sure that the container is floating. So if you want to be able to expand and collapse a container, choose the drop-down arrow for the container and change it over to floating. And now, as you can notice, we can pick up that container and place it anywhere that we want. When an object is floating, you can put it anywhere. In 19.2, Tableau gave us the Add Show Hide button. So just to kind of demonstrate what this would look like, if I had this Show Hide button, I might close my container or open it to display the objects within. And again, this can be horizontal, stacked side by side, or vertical, stacked top to bottom. Those floating containers allow us to have the collapsible ability. So we say, okay, I can build in a tiled format, I can build in a floating format. Which one do I want to choose? And I would say that there's arguments for both of them. There's also arguments for a combination of the two. But here's one of the things that I want you to consider. In my everyday work, I work on my monitor typically, but sometimes I'm on my laptop screen. For both of those dashboards, I want it to be about 1100 pixels wide. That works well in our organization if a user needs to print the data that they're seeing in a landscape format. But when I'm on my monitor, I want the dashboard to expand to the full height. And when I'm on my laptop, I want it to shrink to the smaller screen. This is where Tableau allows us to control that dashboard size. If I were to work with a fixed size of my dashboard, it won't change sizes, it'll simply add scroll bars if needed. If I open up a big dashboard on a small screen, I'll get both horizontal and vertical scroll bars. I could also choose automatic, which allows me to expand and collapse to the entire dashboard. In my case, I'm going to use a range. My width of the dashboard isn't changing, but the height is. So here's something that I want you to consider. We've been talking about the value of these layout containers. And if they're used correctly, if they're used from the beginning of your design phases to understand where objects are placed, then when you change the dashboard size, let's say in the future, I need this dashboard to be able to fit nicely into a PowerPoint presentation. On my dashboard pane, when I change my dashboard size to PowerPoint, I would hope that everything would adjust proportionately. But unfortunately, with the way that we've designed this people overview, when we change the dashboard size, things get expanded out in a strange way. If from the very beginning, we think about how that dashboard size is going to change. So for example, in this case, our dashboard size is fit to the same width, but varying heights for different screens. Then we have the opportunity to make sure that it adjusts in the correct way. So for example, if this screen size were to change with the way that we've designed this dashboard, you can see that everything adjusts proportionately. All of the items get a little bit bigger and they all keep their same spacing. And if you ever want to check to make sure that you have the organization that you're interested in your layout pane for your dashboard, we have our item hierarchy. And as of Tableau version 2019.1, we have the opportunity to rename components of that hierarchy. So it makes it a little bit easier to find components. For example, I want to show you what I'm calling the right side of the bottom of the dashboard. Because I have my map and then the container that includes both the text box and the bar chart inside of a vertical layout container that's distributed evenly, it doesn't matter if my dashboard height changes because these objects are going to adjust the correct way. So I found this really, really valuable, and Cesar and I worked on a lot of variations that allowed this dashboard to be very flexible. You can see that when it's shown on my 1920 by 1080 resolution monitor, I have a little bit of gray space around the edges, but I can see the full dashboard. Or when I open it up on my 1600 by 900 laptop, the same is true. I still get to see the entire dashboard, even though the resolution and the screen sizes are a little bit different. So if you want more information on this, Vinod and Ross did a great presentation during VizConnect back in May on Device Designer and how those components work. But to make our dashboards look great, we also need to consider that spacing around the dashboard, as well as our font sizes and our layout. So Cesar's going to walk us through how we might do this using that layout pane.
Hey, folks. Well, great. Let me go through and let me start sharing what I've got to show everyone. So here we go. So we're starting off on this beautiful worksheet, and I know a lot of you are looking at this, and kind of the same thing I'm thinking is really, how can I make my worksheets look this way? My worksheets don't look this way, and it's, as you know, as a pro, I go into organizations and I take a look at Tableau server, and it's the first thing I see where I'm like, hey, if they just had a little bit more design, these would be fantastic dashboards. You wouldn't really think about the design too much, or how things are not really pixel perfect, or things can be offset. It doesn't bother you as much. And you look at something like the dashboard we created here. It actually does seem to be very well balanced, and it draws your eyes, and it's almost like your eye just kind of follows it naturally. So the big question, and I think this is kind of where I started too, was what do I need to do to take my dashboards to that next level? How do I level up on my dashboard design? And I'm going to start off by, let me jump over a couple of slides now and kind of show you what this looks like here. And I'm flipping back and forth between kind of the finished product and a dashboard, probably similar to what most of us would create. And you start to see just a little bit of difference here, but the big difference also is padding. We're using padding from the layout container to just kind of adjust the way these look, and really also kind of send your eye in a certain direction. Things just seem to be a little bit off on this dashboard. So let me start from the beginning too. So I came to Katie a while back, and it all just started off with one comment of like, I love layout containers, and oh my gosh, I have so many tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, and I've picked up. And actually, the one person I think I have to credit with a lot of what I've learned is Curtis Harris. If you have not heard of Curtis Harris, definitely go through and Google his name, Curtis Harris, Tableau, and even try layout containers, because he actually created a really fantastic YouTube video on how he uses layout containers. And that itself has kind of changed the way I design with layout containers. And it's kind of helped me develop this pro look. And it wasn't something that came naturally. I think I lucked into a lot of good design in the past, but in order to use it just properly in Tableau and have that right control, he's mastered that. And Curtis is an Iron Viz champion. If you don't know what Iron Viz is, um, Google that as well. But his YouTube video is fantastic, and it's one of the YouTube videos I have in this list of YouTube videos on Tableau that should have 1 million views, but they don't for some reason. But definitely go out, check out his video. It's fantastic, and he goes really in depth on how he uses this for himself. But something I learned a lot about by watching Curtis work and also working with Curtis is how he uses the layout pane. And it was interesting to me because with the layout pane, you've got a couple of sections here. You can show the title, you can float things, you can move positions, X and Y, and height and width of things of your layout containers. Also, you can create borders. So if I go through and I select this guy here, I can create a border on that. One of the tips for borders, though, if you're going to do it, be very subtle. If you're going to create a border, just try very light lines, almost not noticeable, really just something very, very, very soft, and think sensitive with borders. Don't go too dark or too or too bright with these, because they don't resound well when there's too much there. Also, you might want to actually take up some space with those, but you don't need to, because I'm going to move into the padding section of this. And the way I consider padding, there's inner and outer padding. And I know I've had a lot of people ask me about padding. And, what does the inner mean? What does the outer mean? They get really confused, and they start losing control. And they feel like they're out of control when they're kind of, hunting and pecking to see if they can get the proper design and what they're looking for. And they don't usually find it. So my way of looking at padding, and let me do this to help everybody kind of understand what we're seeing here when we pad. I'm going to double click on these layout containers so I can get to my lowest level container. I can also go to the hierarchy and pick that. But here, I'm going to make my background just a bit darker, just so we can see it. And there we go. Just a tiny bit. Let's see if I can get just a little lighter too. So this way we can see what the background layer. And all I did was I just gave a tint to that base layer layout container. And what you're seeing is you're seeing it come through for everything else. These are our other worksheets we've dropped on. But here, I'm going to show you just a little bit of what we can do with padding. So with outer padding here, let me go through. I'm going to add, let's do 4 pixels here. Oops, that's not where I wanted to do it. Let me undo that. I wanted to do it right here on this container. And I'm going to add 4 pixels here, just to give it just a little bit of space. I'm going to do it here as well, just so you can see that. And you can kind of see what's happening here with these pixels. So we're just adding little bits of space here to our outer pad. You wouldn't see this if the background was the same color. But that comes to my next point too, is that by going through and adjusting your outer padding, what you can do is you're building these channels that will help your viewers really, it'll start taking their eye and drawing their eye where you want it to go. So that made it easier to see kind of what's happening there at this level. We went through and we padded the outer part of the containers, each one of these. And by going through and padding these just slightly, we can start seeing that we're building these channels. And there is a technical term for these channels. We in the design world, they're called gutters. You can start building gutters. So the gutters come in between layout containers. And by doing that, you can start to kind of, you're really kind of lassoing up certain regions. And by doing so, you can start to adjust what your viewer sees and kind of how they see it. So one of the goals here, especially with going through and building gutters, is you want to take their eye and you want to see if you can actually help them see the data in the manner that you're seeing it. Now, the background here might be a little off-putting. It's not perfect, but I'm doing this right now just so you can see what's happening here. So that's outer padding. Inner padding, a little different. So what you can do with the inner pad is this is where you give your dashboard elements breathing room. And this is a term, I've heard it from Adam Crane. I've heard Andy Kriebel use breathing room. It really just a lot of designers refer to as white space. What it'll do is it just kind of moves everything in away from the edges. And you can actually go through and pad just about anything. If you see our logo here, the logo for the dashboard, for me, it feels like it's right up on the edge. It doesn't feel like it's given a lot of room to breathe. So let me go through and let me pad it just a little bit. If I go through and I just give it, just 5 points of padding, it moves it away from those edges. And this is kind of a pro tip for most dashboards that I see. I don't know how often I go into an organization and it looks like the data is coming right up to the edge of the dashboard. And really, by going through and being able to pad in just a tiny little bit, and it doesn't need to be a lot, even though I do have to confess, I love to go in and try 20 points of padding, just to see what that looks like. And I'll start off big because I like to see that here. 20 is too much. And you saw Katie do that one item earlier where she drew a line and it said it was 11 pixels. Well, the reason it was 11 pixels was because it had 4 pixels of padding above it and 4 pixels of padding below it, or coming up to about 8 pixels. So her line is only about 2 pixels wide. The same thing's happening here. We're now, by putting in so much padding, we're choking off our dashboard element here. So we can probably tone this down to, let's say, 10. That still looks all right. We're kind of moving everything centrally, and you start to see how things move that way. For our finished dashboard, I think we went with 5, just so it gave us some room also to change layout. But you start to see how this works out. So we've got inner pad of 5, an inner pad here. We can do that here of 5. But one of the ways I describe this to folks is, well, consider something like this. You've gone through and you've built your dashboard. Here is your scatter plot you've put a lot of effort into, and this is what you want to show people. It's like going on vacation and finding, a beautiful vase. How are you going to bring that home? Well, the first thing you want to do is put it in a box. So you go through and you put this in a layout container. Same thing with the charts. Put it in the layout container, and you go through and you pad that. So here we're going to pad this just slightly, 5 points. So it's like taking that vase and putting it in a box and padding that box and making sure it's nice and tight. Closing that, and then we have that box tightly packed, pretty much to where we want it. And then we go through and put it into a suitcase that we're going to bring it home with us. So here we're looking at our one scatter plot, and how do we bring this home? Well, we bring it home by padding it also. You pad it just slightly, and just so you can get these channels or gutters exactly where you want them. And by going through and using both inner and outer padding, you're really making a difference. Now, I won't leave this like this, and you can go back and see just more of a finished product of how this ends up looking. From what you see is you've got an area with our big ass numbers at the very top. And this is kind of what you want people to go through and read first. You're drawing their eye. Then there's this giant section here with the scatter plot. Well, let's sit and understand this. You want that viewer to come back and take a look at that direction. Then they might move on naturally to the map, or take a look and see how quickly these recs are filled, this lower chart. And you're building this path here by just laying out your gutters in the right way and using layout properly. So with that, I think I've pretty much covered most everything with inner and outer padding to a certain extent. But the next thing I want to go through and jump to is the layout. How do you lay this out so you can actually get folks and you can get their audience to move through the dashboard the way you kind of want them to. And I've seen people, go through and put numbers on their dashboard, but let's go back and start with Katie's first dashboard here. And this might have been what you see. And I'm kind of highlighting two different areas here. And this might be what you see when you look at it normally, or at least what you think you're seeing. There'll be people who will take a look at this and, oh yeah, but wait, you also see these columns. It's not just two sections. When I take a look at Katie's dashboard and I take a close look at it, what do I see? I actually see a grid. And this is actually what made me just jump out to Katie and go, oh my gosh, this is great. I love this. Because this is how I design. This is actually my tip for everyone. And this is to move and be able to design dashboards faster, where you don't have to think too much about design. This is it's a tip, and it will help you build so much faster. Is I start off with this grid where I have really just, it's a 3x3 grid. And what I think of when I think about my dashboard is just kind of how do I want to lay out my elements in this dashboard? And you can lay them out so that you're really kind of drawing that eye through this grid somehow. And there's a lot of theory behind this. Really, if you want to dig in deeper, you can dig in so much deeper when it comes to layout and design. There's so much content out there. Really, just check out YouTube. But there's an ability to go through and start to lay things out this way. And you can have fun with this grid. This might not click quite yet, but you can start having fun with these. It's not completely locked in. You can move on to, well, maybe moving some of these grid elements together. And you can start to see, well, you know what, I'm going to put my KPIs along the top, or I can put my KPIs along the side. I might have a larger element that I'll put in this region here by just kind of conjoining a couple of these grid elements. Maybe it's a map, maybe it's a scatter plot like we saw before. But you can also think about, just flipping that around. Let's have fun. Really the idea is to have fun with this and be creative. But it all starts off with that grid and how you're going to move these elements around. How do you start off? How do you start dropping elements into this grid pattern? And really, when you start thinking about dashboards this way, it feels like at least 60% of the problem is gone. The design part is out of the window. You know where and how to lay things out. And then once you start getting used to using this, you can really start getting creative. Same idea of the grids. We're just elongating out these. So maybe you've got a long text element and a chart, and another one, and that text element. So it's not locked in. The idea is not to lock you in, but to start giving format. And the idea with formatting is to help you build out speed and consistency. So often I hear people having their own style. I can name out at least 30 or 40 names where you see one of their dashboards and oh, that's Chantilly's chart or that's Katie's chart. Just by how they build. And in concept, this is kind of what they're doing, if they know it or not. They do have really a template they build to. So it really does help in speed, consistency, and it also gives you that pro look, especially if you start thinking about being pixel perfect and having these lines, giving things space and room to breathe and giving it plenty of white space. So we go back to the dashboard we just saw, and once again, what does it look like to me? Well, that's what it looks like to me. It falls into that grid. It pretty much looks just like that to me in my head, especially when we started. It cuts out really nicely and cleanly. You start seeing where all the gutters are. And really, by looking at the gutters and then using the padding, because nobody wants to be in the gutter, you want to go through and pad your elements so that they do move away from these gutters. And so that they do have room to breathe. If you've got too much, it might be too much. If you're looking at it and you start thinking more simply, sometimes less is a lot more in dashboards. But in order to really, really get that pro look and kind of level up on your dashboards, these are just design elements. And like I said, you don't always have to grid out You don't always have to use layout containers. In reality, once you get used to building these, you'll start to have fun with it. But it will kind of become that underlying layer of how you build. And you can start floating, you can start doing more complex things. But just by thinking of design from this element, your dashboards will look so much better and you'll see it quickly. And everyone else will too. As soon as you start publishing these on your corporate server, people will notice your dashboards or on Tableau Public too. So hopefully that helps. Trying to think, there are other things you can actually take these concepts of design and go and learn a lot more. There's so many resources out there. I'll say, from a photography standpoint, check out something called the rule of thirds, and it kind of is based on this grid as well. Look that up. It's the rule of thirds, and it doesn't take very much in Google to take a look at. You'll see even movie titles and some of the best graphic design you've ever seen. It follows this rule of thirds and how they lay things out, where you're pretty much almost guaranteed something that looks really good and appealing just by how you lay out your items. Also, with that, take a look at something called the golden ratio and go through and research this. And this is homework. Go through, take a look at that. Watch Curtis Harris's YouTube video because he does need more views. It's excellent. And beyond that, just really think about how you can use padding. Remember, just about anything in Tableau can be padded. And this way you can figure out your process. You get some speed and consistency when building. And you also get that pro style. And finally, you get your own style. People will start to not acknowledge you as, this is your dashboard. This is how you build. And with that, I do want to say thank you for joining us. This was fantastic, and we hope you really learned to love the layout pane.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cesar. So there are a lot of excellent questions from all of you in the Q&A, so we appreciate those. I've tried to answer as many as I can, but I'm sure Cesar has some feedback on them as well. As a recap, we want to make sure that we think about the dashboard size, and especially if we need to show it on multiple devices or multiple screens. Sometimes there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but if we can try to leverage, for example, that varying height, then it's something that saves us some design time. With that, we need to think about the alignment and the layout of the objects inside of our dashboard, as well as the space around them. So, Cesar walked us through padding, and one of the things that we figured out on our dashboard was, while we would have loved to have a 20 pixel gutter around the entire dashboard, unfortunately, that made the items way too small when we published it to the laptop size screen. So we compromised and we decided to go with that 5 pixel gutter all the way around. So just something to think about if you know that your dashboard is going to vary in size. And then finally, we're an advocate for a hybrid approach between tiled and floating objects. I try to build items in the tiled layout as much as possible, but it's really great to have floating for that added flexibility and for things like collapsible containers, because we all know that real estate on a dashboard is limited and very, very important. So we're happy to stick around for any additional questions that you might have. Feel free to put those into the Q&A. I've also posted Cesar and I's, our Twitter handles inside of the chat window. So if you think of questions after the session, feel free to connect with us there. We want to thank the entire VizConnect team for having us and for all of you for joining and walking through. And we can't wait to hear what suggestions you have and what additional questions you have about Tableau's layout pane. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Katie and Cesar. I think surely we have fallen in love with layout pane. I can say that. And just one question I have. I think we just take 2 minutes. So, what do you think about with respect to Tableau Public? If you want to just talk about that.
I'm sorry. Say that one more time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I was just asking about, just as a last question, like what do you think about the importance of Tableau Public if I want to go ahead and improve my data visualization skills.
Good question. So how do we improve Tableau Public? Cesar, do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, I love Tableau Public for what it is. It really gives everyone a chance to kind of show that progression, especially when it comes to layout and design. And it's interesting to me to go back, and I know even I've had resumes come across my desk, and one of the first things I'll do when I see someone's name is let me check to see if they've got a Tableau Public account. And from there, I want to see that progression. I want to see, have they really kind of developed their own style? And everyone starts off the same way. It always, I mean, for me, it was, blue and orange, or even before that, green and red charts all over the place with lots of colors, and used to refer to as Skittles. But it's always interesting to go through and see people progress, especially also, I mean, we're in the community. We like to see folks come out and, kind of share their visualizations. Hey, I just built this. If anyone has suggestions, let me know. And it's always fun to see that. I personally love Tableau Public.
Yeah, I agree with that, Cesar. And all I'll add to this is I've been trying to leverage my Tableau Public profile recently to display some of the things that I would work on in my everyday job. So I think many people use it as their creative outlet. I've been trying to recreate data sources that I use at work in the human resources department, and to give more additional business examples of what those dashboards might look like. So flexing those creative skills, but also sticking with stuff that I work on all day long.
Okay. Thank you for that, Katie and Cesar. And I think with that, thanks a lot for coming and presenting on VizConnect. With that, everyone, will see you next week with another session. Take care of yourself and a happy weekend to everyone. Thank you.